one way or another since '69, before OSHA existed. In the area of health and safety, never really been hurt on the job, but I've been a political organizer, and I've helped people, to some extent, I've helped people understand how to move forward. And I remember I started off together with Teamsters Local 688 in St. Louis. In '69, I was invited to a meeting of people at a lead smelter, the biggest lead smelter in the United States, St. Joe Mineral Corp. And you probably know that lead is a serious poison, a neurological poison. It's very bad for children and other living things. And the fellas at the meeting were in their late 20s or early 30s, and they were saying, I can't get it up. I can't father children. And they were saying this around me. They had just met me, but they were desperate for answers. They'd been trying for 2 years to find out whether they were being leaded or being exposed to cadmium and zinc through working at this smelter. They couldn't find out the answer. And so I started working with that local, and we did some other things. And one thing led to another, and I ended up working for the Occupational Health Project of the Medical Committee for Human Rights back in '72. And our theory was, unless the people who were affected most directly, that is, workers on the shop floor, local union leaders, get involved in these struggles, nothing's going to happen. Because at the higher levels, even of the union movement, with exceptions, and we could, there are many exceptions, but the general feeling is health and safety is another pain in the ass. It's another paper to file. Don't bother me. We have these negotiations every 3 or 4 years. And this is today for the 7% of the labor force in the private sector that's actually in labor unions. It used to be 25% when I wrote the first version of Death on the Job. So anyway, what I want to talk about briefly is where workers' comp comes from, where and why we have the mess that we have today. What you have to understand, workers' comp, as we know it, originally comes from Bismarckian Germany. Bismarck was a conservative politician in the 1880s. He was fighting against a rising labor movement, a socialist movement. He outlawed the Socialist Party in Germany. And so they said, well, let's have workers' comp, let's have national health insurance to get a little ahead of the workers' movement. It was adopted by the English around 1890 or 1900 and picked up by the Americans. And so what you have to understand is a system was set up that was, people said, what was happening in the United States at the time, and there was a famous book called Work Accidents and the Law. They followed every death, in Crystal Eastman, who was the writer, followed every death in Allegheny Council, Pennsylvania, in the year 1907, 1908. There were over 400 or 500 deaths. This, of course, is a huge steel-making area. And she said, well, what are we going to do about this? So she came up with this pat solution called workers' comp. And the National Civic Federation, which was basically a federation set up by people like Andrew Carnegie, who was a steel mill owner, great bankers, said, well, we'll have workers' comp. Well, the labor movement said, I don't think so. We're winning some of these cases in the courts. We don't want to give up the right to sue. Notice that we're talking about this today. We don't want to give a right to sue. The immigrants, more and more in Pennsylvania and other places, will becoming citizens. They were starting to appear on juries. So, but what happened was, the idea of workers' comp was very simple. Make sure that everyone that's hurt on the job gets something. You break an arm, okay, they take care of the arm. You break your back, okay, supposedly it gets taken care of. But what happened was they wanted to set a cap on benefits. So instead of getting pain and suffering, getting some kind of payments that were commensurate with with what you had gone through that would actually take care of you. They set a cap on benefits. Well, the labor movement saw that, you know, all these big capitalists were behind this. They couldn't say no to it. So they said, well, I tell you what, let's make sure the entity that does the workers' comp is state-owned, because people knew that insurance companies, from what they knew about liability insurance, about life insurance, the insurance companies would take huge amounts of money, build giant buildings downtown. And you know where the John Hancock building comes from in Chicago. I think it's the tallest skyscraper in the United States. You know, that comes from somebody's insurance premiums, right? And you go to any great city and you see that sort of thing. So what happened was, in Washington State, it was the first state that actually set up a workers' comp system that was run by the state. And they had an odd political coalition. For some reason, the lumber industry, which was the most dangerous industry and had about half of the industrial workers in the state, you know, a state that had maybe 1 million inhabitants back in 1910, they united with the Washington Federation of Labor, and they said, we're going to keep the private insurance companies out of this thing because we don't trust them. And so they set up a system whereby the private insurance companies are not allowed to carry workers' comp insurance in Washington State. And over the years, 1 year in, 1910 was the last time the private insurance industry, plus the building contractors, and we know they hire a lot of people, what we call undocumented people in the building industry. A lot of times they don't pay the people, they don't get workers' comp. Okay, anyway, the insurance industry plus the State Contractors Association tried to overturn, tried to crack open the workers' comp thing in Washington State in 1910. Guess what? They lost by about a margin of something like 58 to 42%. But there's only 4 states in the last 10 years. Nevada, which had an exclusive state fund, has been wiped out and privatized. Same happened in West Virginia. So there are only 4 states left in which private insurance companies, which we know are rip-off organizations, they're not allowed to practice workers' comp. Now, I actually went to, there's a report you can get, and it's done, it comes out every year, and God forbid, you know, another damn report to read, but there's something called the National Academy for Social Insurance, NACI, and they turn out a report every year called Workers' Comp Benefits, Coverage and Costs, every year. And so if you look at the report that came out, that came out in 2012, they have all the figures from 2010 as best you can figure. But and so you say, well, isn't that nice? The government is keeping an eye on this system. Not true. This is a private nonprofit. Most of the data that goes into the system is supplied by the insurance companies. And, you know, we found, and so you can't really trust the data. But anyway, but doing the best I could to try to figure out, what we found out is, for exclusive state funds, these 4 states of North Dakota, Wyoming, Ohio, and Washington, of all the money that goes into the system, 76% comes back in some kind of benefits, health care or income maintenance for the worker. Of the private systems, we're only private insurance companies, there's about 20 or 30 states like that, only 65% comes back in some form of benefits. The rest of it is building these big buildings, paying these gigantic salaries. AES is one of the biggest insurance companies, and they were involved in this whole banking scandal and everything, and they got hundreds of billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars from TARP. When the banks started going bankrupt, they get bailed out. They're too big to fail. So that's the kind of thing that goes on. So what we're arguing is, you know, if you're going to have a state fund, which is probably, workers' comp is probably an inferior solution, but if you're going to have it, at least have it controlled by the state, so there's some kind of transparency. That's number one. Now, the second thing, and Steve has argued for this, and other people, Joe Ledoux, who's a retired professor at UCSF up on the Hill here, he says, get rid of workers' comp. Why shouldn't you, if you get hurt on the job, go to your own doctor, right? Just go to your own doctor in a normal way. And if you're, if you're old like me, I'm older than I look. I'm three score and 10. If you're old, I'm pretty much taken care of by Social Security and Medicare. Well, what we would say is bring Medicare, just expand it to everyone. And if you get hurt on the job, just have your own doctor take care of you, and avoid the middleman, as they say. Get rid of the thieves, okay? And this is this is not unthinkably difficult. I mean, in say uncivilized countries like Canada, they have, everyone knows that's not a civilized country. They have something called national health insurance, and only maybe 8 or 9% of the whole gross domestic product goes to pay for health, and they live longer. There's another example. We could go on and on. So, these are the kinds of struggles we should talk about. But these things are not being talked about, obviously, by the corporations. They're not being talked about by the labor movement anymore, even though if you go back to the minutes of the 1914 or 1915 American Federation of Labor, which was, is now the AFL-CIO, their official position was, we want to have publicly owned workers' comp, a la Washington State, okay? And, there's been, so this is one part of the solution. I think you probably argue that way back in 1910, when there was no health insurance, no private insurance for health, probably was better having workers' comp, even privately owned. So if you broke your leg, someone would take care of you. But in any case, I think that's where it has to go. The other thing is, if you had a system like this, and Professor Thomas Mancuso, we heard him in Pittsburgh back in 1972, wonderful speech. If people who were hurt on the job went to their own doctor, they went to some public system, would have a way of documenting who dies when, which jobs are dangerous, which companies are killers. The only reason, and everyone knows that the closest thing to a real, there's been about 2 or 3 big victories in occupational health. I'm not talking about the accidents. I'm talking about occupational health. Has been the de facto banning of asbestos. Now, they haven't been able to ban asbestos completely, but usage of new asbestos is down 99 or 99.5% since the middle 70s. And, you read Barry Commoner's work. The reason is because Local 12 and Local 34 of the Asbestos and Frost Insulators Union kept data from their pension fund. They knew when everybody died, and so they knew that people who were exposed to a lot of asbestos died, 40% and 45% died of asbestos-related disease. We could do that for the whole country if we had a reasonable way to collect data. It's not a mystery, but it's only a mystery to those who believe. I mean, when Obamacare was coming in, he wouldn't even allow Quentin Young, who used to be his personal physician, who was head of MCHR, Medical Committee for Human Rights, when I worked with him, to testify in favor of a publicly owned medical care system. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. I just wanted to give a little background here, and I think it's very important to fight over these things in California. But it seems like every time you turn the wheel or you turn the crank a little bit, you get some things that have changed a little bit, and then it seems, as they say, the more it changes, the more it stays the same. Or you could, it's like that old expression I used to hear from my father in Brooklyn. He said there's an expression, "Nimm the Geld." It's an Italian or some foreign language. It means take the money and run. And that's what nimm the Geld, take the money and run. And that's what the insurance industry is about. And keep it out of the hands of no goods, like the people in this room, like Barbara, okay? That's all I have to say. So I think we have to bring these issues up. I think you're going to find some of the COSH groups, the Committees on Safety and Health, you have to bring them up in these venues and do the best you can, because when you're an injured worker, what happens is with the labor movement, and this is my opinion, because I've been tied up with the thing for a long time on and off, for many labor leaders, not all of them, occupational health and safety is just another paper to file, another pain in the ass. If you have a job, you're driving they used to all drive Ford Galaxies in the 70s. But, you know, you don't want to be bothered with it. You want to negotiate the contract every 4 years. Your union gets a piece of that, and then forget about it. Our attitude is reach down. Once you have an injury, you're no longer working. You're not a member of the union, if you even have a union. And so that's where it's at.